With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful ends for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm with my brothers, friends, countrymen, S.J. Jennings and Tom Benner and Greg Sailors. And countrymen. We're citizens of this country that God has created in this beautiful spiritual realm in which we are citizens. And so, we're together to talk about that, explore more of that. And this is the beginning of a series that we are going to dive into. I don't know, SJ. I don't think we can put 6 or 5. I don't know.
We got to just quit saying that.
We'll announce how many.
Listeners, you'll figure it out when we're done talking about it.
That's right. That's right. But what's happened is over the last 13 some years that Zoweh's been a something. And these guys have joined the team. But you guys joined the team long after we were friends and friendship and exploring together and walking with God together. And so what this series is about are some of what I would call eventful, strategic, important discoveries that we made with the help of others within our own conversations, just giving words to some of the discoveries that I think now Zoweh is known for. These are things that if you've listened to any of the 60 other podcasts, you've probably heard these things that we call the 4 pillars.
Yeah.
4 Pillars of Zoweh.
Not to correct you, this is episode 98.
Dadgum.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a lot more than I thought. That's cool. We'll get into 100 then in this series.
Probably so, yeah.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. So, listeners, this is the 4 Pillars of Zoweh series, and I'm just going to share the pillars real quick, guys, and then we're going to just dive into number 1 today and probably next week. The 4 Pillars of Zoweh are, number 1, intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God. That's just our foundation. That's our bedrock.
Everything else sprouts from that.
Yep. Everything.
It's a firm foundation.
So that's why it's number 1.
That's right.
You know,
cornerstone, if you want to call that.
Yeah. And so these are sequential. These have a series to them. If that's foundational, we're going to build these others on it. If that's the starting point, we're going to then see the linear 2, 3, and 4. So that's number 1, intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God. Number 2 is what we call orientation. A man who knows, or a woman who knows who they are, where they are, and the good that God's up to in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know who you are, where you are, and the good that God's up to in your life by knowing and being and experiencing intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God.
That's right.
See what I did there?
Hey, down them together.
Build it on there.
You see how that's working? So number three is the pillar, nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear. So intimacy leads to orientation, and orientation leads to a life that looks like Jesus.
Right. Free.
Because Jesus lived that way. Nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear. And then number 4 is the fruit of that life is a life of more love, more life, and more freedom. When you get to 4, that's where 4 others begins.
Right.
And so there's so much to talk about in this series. I don't know who it was. Maybe it was you, SJ, but I don't think it was my idea. So one of you guys said something. We got to talk about the 4 pillars. And
You know who it was?
I got excited.
It was Christopher Matthews.
Yeah, that's right. The new
webmaster.
The new website has got these listed now there. There's descriptions and some videos and other things, and probably this podcast will be on there eventually. So, we'll honor Christopher with that. That's really, really good. Thank you for reminding me. So, today, 4 pillars. Pillar number 1, let's talk about intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah. Greg, how come?
My middle name's Love. Not that that's a prerequisite for enjoying intimacy.
No, that doesn't mean anything about anything. No, it's good. You remind us often, and it's good to be reminded.
It's good to be
I forgot
reminded.
Since yesterday.
I couldn't believe that you forgot that. There's something about knowing and being known, Michael. Something that we practice here at Zoweh amongst our team is that we know each other and that we know each other's story, that we desire to catch up. I mean, Tom was gone for a week or so, and what happened to you? Because we enjoy each other. And so Intimacy, closeness, right? Being in proximity, but also in proximity of heart. It reflects the way we want to be with God, and we enjoy that with each other.
Yeah, let's make sure the listeners caught that. By definition, what we mean when we say intimacy is knowing and being known. It's what we're made for. It's what the relationship that we have with God is about, intimacy. And it's what the relationship that we can have with one another. Love God, love one another.
Mm-hmm.
And there's intimacy, oneness, and connectedness there. You said that, Greg. That's got to be, what is intimacy? Close proximity, knowing and being known, one another's stories. What have you been through? What's happened to you?
Mm-hmm. What's God teaching
What's
you?
God showing you?
Yeah.
What's God revealing to you? Yes, all of that. That's good.
Yeah, and another big part of it, too, is taking off the mask, being authentic, letting people see who you really are and not being afraid of that.
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we don't have a lot of that in our lives most of the time, in our dealings in the world and business and life. The tendency is to kind of be guarded a little bit.
Put the mask on.
Pose.
Yeah, so think about that with God, too. We just have this tendency to be afraid to be real sometimes, thinking that the response is not going to be an embrace or a loving counsel or an offering to where you're broken or where you're hurting. And without that kind of trust that you can come near, which we can now, it's a beautiful thing for all of us to be able to do that. Without that, it's more like just basic religion kind of things. It's not a real experience that you can have in your daily life. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about today is how does this translate?
It's another component to experience one another is the path to intimacy.
Right.
You can't be intimate and connected to something that you don't know or is far off. So it's not only your glory and your goodness, but it's also this other stuff we talk so much about, the false self, the things that aren't yet restored, that my story and where I've been wounded and hurt, the messages that I've come under, the false self. And you say, I see that, but that doesn't drive me away. I see that and I still want to be with you. I want to pursue together wholeness. That's a very powerful thing.
One of our things that we're going to talk about here is why is intimacy important? So we've talked a little about what intimacy is.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that it's so important is that if you're not known by someone, if you're not knowing someone and being known by someone, then your true self rarely has an opportunity to be discovered or to come out.
Yeah.
Because if you and I get to know each other, Michael, as we have over the last 10, whatever years it's been, I know you well enough now to be able to know when your false self is out of the cage.
Yeah.
And same goes for me. You can tell right away, whoa, man, I know you well enough to know that that's not you that I'm hearing from right now.
And even
and that's a product of intimacy.
I love that. And it's not accountability as we've known it in the past. This is more friendship and saying.
Yeah, accountability is behavior-based, right? I mean,
this is an invitation to be known. Like
Yeah, not refereed or sheriffed or kept in line.
Mm-hmm.
And accountability, it has its place, but I want to say there's a difference between knowing that my false self is out, something's wrong, you know me and can tell when something's wrong. But I also love that I'm known in a way that you also know when something's not right.
Yeah, there's a difference between wrong and not right.
That's right.
I see your point.
But I have both of those. Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk about it?
You can just tell when
Something's
one of us is
off.
heavy-hearted or you're quiet or not engaged. I mean, yes, the false self sightings are helpful. That there's no doubt about that. But to even be in are you okay? Because you know what okay looks and feels like.
That's right. Without intimacy, you really can't do that. Yeah.
You'd miss it and you'd be missed. Yeah.
So, Tom, what else do you think is important about intimacy? Why would you say it's important?
You talking about with each other or with God?
Either one that you care to share about.
Well, I think it's important because we long for it. There's a deep place in each one of us that wants that.
Right.
Not just with each other, but absolutely with God. And that's probably the biggest prize that we're going after is to come to a place of trust. While I was on vacation for a couple of weeks, I was listening to some material from Allender Center on restoration of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that just really lifted my heart was this emphatic statement that God is so committed to our wholeheartedness it's not something that we just have to constantly come and beg and ask for. It is really being poured out for us. It's part of the life that's unfolding for each one of us every day. Again, it's about having eyes to see and ears to hear that and to be aware of it. But for some reason, it just shifted something inside of me to really get my heart and head around that idea that God is so for me. And when I'm in a place of anxiety or concern or worry, and I'm trying to figure it all out myself, that there's a place that I can go that brings rest, that brings peace, that brings orientation, it takes me out of that spin. But having intimacy with others like we've gotten is really a great platform to begin to understand how to trust another person and then trust God. And I guess it can work both ways, but they both feed into each other.
Yeah. You said it. I want to make sure our listeners heard it. This is what we're made for. It's really, really why it's number one, and why you said at the beginning of your thoughts there that it's something we desire. It's something we long for. Well, I'm adding to that because it's what we're made for.
Yeah.
We're made for connection.
Hardwired even.
We are relationally created by the Trinity for intimacy, oneness, and connectedness. So we long for that.
We do.
We've gone to all kinds of extremes to try to arrange it for ourselves, to try to make it happen. But I think, Tom, that desire is really, really, really good. It's just a question, like C.S. Lewis made me so aware, it's where do we take it? The desire is good, but like any desire, it can be counterfeited. The enemy can come along and offer counterfeit things that will not satisfy the longing and the ache that we have for being known, being wanted, being invited, being heard. And we've talked about that. But this is a love affair, right? This is about being in love with God and experiencing love with others. That's why intimacy is so important. You said trust. I mean, your word, I think you're carrying it on to 2 years now, vulnerability.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
These are components of intimacy that are needed in order to then go deeper and explore your story, other stories. I was with a bunch of men the other day, and a guy said, I've never even considered looking back over my story.
Wow.
And answering the question, what happened to me?
Yeah.
Goodness.
It was inviting and kind of terrifying to him at the same time.
Sure. I remember that moment.
I can relate to that too. Yeah,
At the beginning of this journey.
Typically for most of us, who would ever lead you or guide you into that?
Right.
Unless you're maybe with a counselor or something that had some training on how to do that. But most of my experience didn't include, in fact, you just figured, well, just forget what's in the past and move on, to the prize of the high calling. And that's sort of a waste of time, actually, is the way I looked at it.
Right.
Yeah.
But without it, you don't have the intimacy and you don't have the known and being known. So it's pretty obvious it's necessary.
It's a critical piece.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that, Tom, because I think what you're talking about is, for many of us, what gets in the way of intimacy with God and others. What you just said is going back and kind of unearthing some of those things. But Greg, what do you think about intimacy and why it's important? What's your take on that?
It's life. We can't really do life without intimacy with God. And everything else is false, I would say, that folks experience or the enemy offers us. I think about my life before, and we call it this message a lot, right? This message of freedom and life and things we've learned from our friends like Gary Barkalow and Eldridge and others. But I didn't have life the way I have it now. And so it's absolutely vital. I don't know any other way to do it anymore. And I don't know any other way to do it with other people anymore. I've found that I can be too much sometimes because of my comfortability with being intimate. Even, you're a little bit TMI, with your story or...
Tell the listeners what TMI means. It's not a disease. Well, it could be a disease.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the definition. Yeah. Too much information.
Too much
I think.
information.
Yeah.
But I so desire for the false self to be down, and I love to have fun and joke around like the rest of us. But without true intimacy one to another, then it's probably a relationship that I'm not going to be in very long. I desire to have that, and I think God hardwired us that way. And there's so much in the way of it. It's arresting to other people when they see it sometimes.
Yeah, or inviting. But it can be. You're right. I think that's a really interesting point.
Let's take a quick break, Michael, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about, Tom brought up, and now you've brought it up too, Greg, so we must need to talk about it, the things that can get in the way of intimacy with God and each other. Hey, podcast listeners, it's SJ again. Just wanted to make sure you all know about 2 major events we have coming up soon. We don't want you to miss out on the chance to sign up and experience a weekend that just might change the trajectory of your life. The first one I want to talk to you about briefly is the Heart of a Warrior Allies Advance. During the weekend, we'll explore the masculine journey and the glory of your life, how you uniquely bear God's image, and the redemptive friendships available when a man meets allies and brothers who will fight beside him for freedom. The format of the weekend includes small group dimension and conversations while continuing to offer critical moments of time alone with God. We hope you'll get away and hear God's voice, pursue more healing, more restoration, and invite the Father to validate and initiate you as a beloved son, a warrior heart, and a good king. The Zoweh Heart of a Warrior Allies Advance is coming up at March 19th through the 22nd at the Young Life Rockbridge Camp in Goshen, Virginia. And the Advance Weekend is designed for Heart of a Warrior Encounter alumni. And that's the next event I want to talk to you about is the Heart of a Warrior Encounter. And during this weekend, we have 3 main objectives: help a man get his heart back, teach him how to fight, and show him where the battles are. To see Christ come for a man's heart and what God is up to in validating a man, initiating him and calling him into the larger story is truly a glorious thing. It's a fierce journey for every man, but one that needs to be taken. So I would invite you to join the squadrons of men who are hungry and thirsty for more. The kingdom needs more men who know what it is to walk deeply with God. Come join us April 30th through May 3rd at the Heart of a Warrior Encounter Weekend. Again, at Camp Rockbridge in Goshen, Virginia. Come join us and be one of the men who is seeking and finding more. And there is more. For more details and further information, visit zoweh.org/events. And I hope to see you there.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. Michael Thompson with S.J. Jennings, Greg Sailors, and Tom Benner talking about intimacy. And just before the break, it's a great direction to go is, why is there not more of this? What's in the way?
So when we were talking about this podcast, the way it kind of came up in me is, how does intimacy in the physical realm affect intimacy in the spiritual realm? So in other words, how does intimacy that has been thwarted in your life, maybe with your dad, your mom, your wife, your siblings, whoever it is, how has that affected your view or your opinion or how you've experienced intimacy in the spiritual realm?
Let me read this quote from the book, if that's okay.
The book being The Heart of a Warrior by Michael Thompson.
By the Michael Thompson. Found on LinkedIn and other social media places.
Yeah. Instagram.
That's right.
Facebook.
But no, it starts out actually, you're quoting Eldridge, and Eldridge says, the enemy fears us. And then after that it says, he therefore wants to separate you from intimacy with God, from belovedness, from the very thing for which you were created. Separate a man from the Father, and that man is lost. Saved? Sure, but lost. Unable both to receive what God has for him and to provide for and protect for the hearts of others.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Yeah.
Especially the problem. I mean, it kind of identifies this question of what's in the way.
If you look at the story in the garden, which was a story that started out with intimacy, deep intimacy, it got broken. The net of that was fear and then hiding. And those are the two, I think, the 2 biggest obstacles that I deal with in this realm of intimacy is because we're so used to doing that. It's sort of like a default, how we hold back what we really think or feel quite often because we're worried it will be shamed or it won't be understood or will be misunderstood. And plus, it's just not part of our culture, mostly. The culture that we have in our circles, and it's a fairly large circle actually, is so different than anything I've ever experienced in my entire life. And that tells me right there that it isn't the norm and it's something to be fought for and sought after. But there's the overcoming of that tendency to not want to be embarrassed, you know?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about when you say that, Tom, is vulnerability is weakness.
Yeah, right.
And I lived with that belief, and I'm still trying to overcome that. God revealed it to me 2 years ago, as Michael alluded to, and I'm still trying to overcome that concept of if I'm not transparent, because I can be transparent about things and not be vulnerable, but if I'm vulnerable with what's going on in the moment, there's the fear of I'm going to be perceived as weak. I don't have all my stuff together, whatever, right? Which then leads to the hiding that you're referring to.
And posing.
And that, friends and listeners, that's learned. You think about a young heart.
Yeah, they don't do that.
When we were little. And then there's that moment, though, when innocence is being or attempted to be thwarted, where we should be naive when we're 4 and 5 and 7, but something happens and you feel it. You know, if you have children, you probably remember the time, and you might even remember the time it happened to you when you were a child, when something went wrong and you wanted to hide.
Oh, yeah.
Get under the covers.
You broke something. I mean, you think of all Andy Griffith, Brady Bunch, all these old 70s shows. There's an episode of trying to cover up something. Marcia or the kids, and they break a lamp, put mom's bowl back together. It was a bowl. Put the bowl back together on the table in glue. You know, we hide. Maybe it's something that came out of the garden and then into the air and the water. But as human beings, there's something that does come against this intimacy. When we make mistakes, instead of feeling like we can come to the Father, we can come to the Mother, say, look, I didn't mean to. We think we're in trouble, and so we hide, and we're afraid.
So I have 2 experiences with this just recently. I have 4 boys. A lot of the listeners have heard that before, from 13 to 2, and a 7 and a 9-year-old in the middle. My 7-year-old, Landon, recently, he was doing an art project, and I was reading or doing something, sitting in my favorite chair at home, and he comes up to me and he brings it to me and he's showing it to me, and I'm bothered, right? I'm doing something. So in my mind, I'm bothered. I look at, oh yeah, son, that's good. You know, I tried to feign interest, but I was seriously interested in what I was doing. And so he goes back to the table and he does it a little more, and he comes back again. And I'm like, I still don't get it, right? You know, he shows it to me again. Oh yeah, that's good, son. Goes back to the table. Well, then I remember what happened to Samuel when he's hearing God's voice, and, you know, he goes to Eli and he's like, I'm hearing this thing. And then finally Eli wakes up and says, oh, that's God. Say, here am I, Lord. Well, the same thing happened to me. Like the 3rd time he comes back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've so missed this, right? This opportunity for intimacy. And what is me not paying attention to him, teach him about intimacy. And so I got him in my lap. Son, I'm so sorry. I love what you've done. And I see it, and I started to comment on it and bring that into intimacy. And he just lit up. So that's one story. Second story, we're playing Phase 10. That's the devil's game, by the way, if you've ever played Phase 10, you know, or at least around our house, because, you know, if we can be skipped or we can skip somebody, you skip them. You know, if they make a sound and they look at you cross-eyed, you skip them. So anyway, we're playing Phase 10, and finally it takes us several days to get done, and Chrissy wins, and Luke's playing, and we're just joshing around and having fun, and I call him a loser. All right, let's talk about the power of your words and the power of dad. Well, he had called me a loser in my defense, but, you know, you can't call your son a loser. And I have a great intimacy with Luke. He's one of my favorite sons, you know, and he started crying, and I'm like defending myself. You just called me a loser, you know, but it's back to the point of what's in the way, right? Those little microcosms of moments can change a kid's trajectory for the rest of their life. Now, thankfully, again, I had the wherewithal to come back. I'm so sorry, son. Dad never really would ever call you that or mean that. I love you. Come, let's spend some time together.
That's good. Great stories. How we learn to hide.
It invites hiding.
Let's just go back to the question, right? What's in the way of intimacy? Sometimes it's our behavior or our thoughts, or it can be things that happen to us. And that's where that false self-construct starts to get its mojo. You know, it starts to get its construction. The enemy comes and whispers that you're on your own. Not only are you not seen, you better not be seen.
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
He doesn't care. Your dad doesn't care.
You're a disappointment. All kinds of whispers that can happen and get in the way of this. And so the journey back is, like you said in the first half of the session, is trust. To trust again is so vulnerable, and to learn that not everybody is trustworthy with your heart. Not everybody is. You have discernment and learning how to guard your heart. And yeah, you got to go a little bit and see if it's okay. You got to go a little more and see if it's okay. And over time, this is how intimacy really does evolve, is develop, and you feel safe in somebody's presence. That's so different than feeling afraid, Tom.
Yeah.
You know, and yet our marriages are vulnerable to this, susceptible to this. Our relationship is fathers to sons, fathers to daughters, no matter how old they are.
Right.
So anything else on that? I want to
Another word that comes to mind is being comfortable in someone's presence with God, being comfortable, just not on edge, whether it's with friends or with God. It's a great description, I think, of when you have intimacy with someone. You can be talking, not talking. You can be together, but there's a connection there on a level that is very, very comfortable.
I have one more thing too, Michael, that goes along with what you're saying there, Tom, which is something I've discovered recently, and we talked about on your porch a few days ago, which is personal intimacy. And I can see how my personal intimacy has affected the way I interact with God. It has been in the way because it was arrested by the things that I had done, sin, stain, evil devices, the things I believed about myself, identity, things I believed because of either failed attempts of intimacy with other people, whether it was on them or me. I began to believe something about myself that, affects the way I feel about me and the intimacy that I have in my own heart. As you guys have experienced, it's sometimes easier to love somebody else than to love yourself. Nobody ever hated his own body, as it says in Ephesians 5, but he nourished it and cherished it. And so, as I'm thinking about intimacy and what's in the way, I think I can be in the way. My woundedness can be in the way.
Yeah, not you, but your false self.
The false self, the wounds, the hurts.
Yeah.
Wounds, vows, agreements.
All those things, not the true me.
Right, the grid that gets arrested by these things,
Right,
So,
and it's easier to project and love other people, but when it comes to your own self and self-care, self-investment.
So the beautiful invitation really is, as you pursue intimacy, you're going to find these things in the way. You have to pay attention, right? What is this? I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling disqualified.
I don't belong.
I don't belong, or somebody's not safe.
You're feeling unsafe. Can I trust these people?
That's right.
That comes up. And it's what you've got to stumble over.
Yeah.
Is, I think what you're saying. It's like you stub your toe on it, some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them you walk right into a wall.
Yeah. Well, if you shut down your heart, right, build the wall's up.
Right.
You shut down your heart to everybody, the big C.S. Lewis quote, right? You shut down your heart to everybody so you don't get hurt. You might as well just go ahead and close the coffin.
Right.
And in there cold and dark, right?
In your isolation,
loneliness.
versus intimacy.
Yeah.
In your isolation, it's a cold and dark place versus, being more discerning and getting out there, moving towards what intimacy was. One of you said something about the correlation between the spiritual and the physical realm. And what came to my mind, honestly, I had such a problem perception-wise of what God was like. And I don't know if it was when I was young. What came to me when you said that was in the picture of the Wizard of Oz when he's doing all his stuff, not the real Wizard of Oz, but how he's portraying himself to Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion.
The projection of the bit,
And hitting the rumbling, the thunder.
Guy.
Yeah, here's the authority figure. Be afraid. I think it's one of the most magnificent, awful things the enemy has done to our believers' perception. I'm not sure unbelievers have it as much as believers have it, that God is not safe.
Good point.
So interesting. So I'm editing a 365-day devotional that we're putting together, Zoweh's putting together for iDisciple, which is an online service where you can go and find all kinds of resources based on, biblical truths. Eventually, what we hope for is that 365-day devotional will become a book. But today, as I'm editing, I was editing an entry that you wrote, Michael, about seeing God as, I think you said, as the principal who keeps giving you a failing grade. Like you're happy on the days you can get like a C+ or a D-, and that's primarily how you saw him.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, that's what motivated you. You said that's what motivated you to some degree, at least, to join ministry full time.
Oh, yeah.
back in the day. Like, well, okay, if I'm
Sign
a
up-
professional Christian.
Sign up for the elite. That's
yeah,
right.
then I'll
Upgrade your game.
Yeah. And what a wonderful day it was when you finally broke free of that by entering into this story, this message
Right.
of more love, life, and freedom. And God wasn't disappointed in you, because that was part of your thinking too. Like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, now God's going to be disappointed in me because I thought he was giving me a letter grade all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And he just tosses that stuff aside and gives you a big old hug.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great moment
It's a great
of
picture.
breakthrough into intimacy.
Yeah. I think this is a good place to stop, because we're going to open up a whole other can of worms.
We are.
A good can of
we
worms when we start telling some stories in the next session about how God pursued us intimately. Because it wasn't some academic thing that, I know the journal entry, I know what you're talking about. It wasn't some academic thing. It was a movement of God to speak, and for me to believe that he wanted to, and that what he wanted to say wasn't harsh or harmful or hurtful, but was for me. And when I started to hear God's voice and experience that, that's when I could really walk away from religion, a performance life, a Christianity that was really tangled up in that, and more life, more love, more freedom, right? I mean, one of the later pillars. So
Yeah, let's pause here.
And call this session 1 of pillar 1.
Of however many there end up being.
and we can talk about this in the next session.
Yeah. So, folks, listeners, we would really love to hear from you about how you have experienced intimacy, or how you discovered what's in the way, or with your questions about how you get those things out of the way, or anything else that you'd love to share with us. We would love to hear from you. Email us at exploringmore@zoweh.org, and we promise we'll get right back to you. The other thing I want to ask you to do, listeners, if you could take a second on whatever your podcast platform might be and leave us a rate or a review, that really helps other listeners to find us on the podcast platform. So we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great. Go to the Zoweh website. New websites coming out that you can check out. And the events, of course, especially right this spring. We have a couple men's events. Go look for the Heart of a Warrior Encounter, April 30th through May 3rd. Great time to get away with God for intimacy and to connect with God. And
just
lot
a
of
few
other
weeks
guys.
away, we've got our advance weekend too for our Encounter alumni. So just a couple of weeks from now.
Yep.
Still got a few seats available for that too. So go to zoweh.org/events for all of that info.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us, and we'll visit with you soon about exploring more in the pillars of Zoweh: intimacy, oneness, connectedness with God. We'll see you next week. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.